My name is Leah Crawford. I'm 32, single, and an interior designer in Charleston, South Carolina. I live in a modest, sunlit apartment on the second floor of a 1920s duplex that I renovated myself, painted the walls sea glass green, exposed the original brick, restored the wood flooring by hand. It smells like eucalyptus and coffee in the mornings, and it's the only space in my life that feels fully mine. I don't come from money. I built my life, like the homes I redesign carefully, intentionally, brick by brick. But even now, with a small but steady stream of clients, my name on the business card, and a portfolio I'm proud of, I'm still the least respected person at my own family table. Not because I've failed, but because I never played their game the right way. In my family, success isn't measured by hard work, it's measured by alignment. You either fit into the image or you don't. And I've never quite fit. My mother, Diane, still refers to my work as decorating, as if I spend my days fluffing pillows for a hobby. My stepfather, Gary, once joked that I should marry someone rich enough to afford my services. My younger half-sister, Maddie, is the golden child, bubbly, photogenic, recently married into a family with old money and newer connections. She's an influencer now, whatever that means, and no family event goes by without someone asking her to take a family selfie she'll later filter into oblivion. And then there's me. The one who brings a bottle of wine no one opens. The one seated at the kids' end of the table even though I pay my own mortgage. The one whose career is treated like a temporary phase, not a real path. I'm not bitter. Or at least, I try not to be. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt. Especially because I tried. God, I tried. I helped raise Maddie when Mom was working night shifts and Gary was too tired. I stayed in Charleston to be close to them when I could have moved to New York and apprenticed with a designer I admired. I lent money I couldn't afford to lose when Gary's second business tanked, and I never asked for it back. Because I thought maybe if I stayed, helped, gave, they'd finally see me. But all it ever earned me was familiarity. Not love. Not respect. Just a convenient presence. Someone who never caused a scene, someone who paid her own way and didn't ask for attention. That was my place in the Crawford family. Useful, but invisible. Until that dinner. It started with a text, casual as a shrug. Family group chat, Crawford fam. Maddie. Hey. So excited for Mom's birthday dinner. I made a reservation at Clover and Maple for Saturday at 6. They gave us a long table by the window. Gary. Nice work, kiddo. Mom. You're an angel, Maddie. Love you, Hatterit. Maddie. Leah, you okay covering this one? Since you don't have, wedding stuff going on yet, COCALOL. I read the message twice. Then a third time. I wasn't sure which part stung more, the assumption or the casual jab. Not, would you be okay? Not, let's all pitch in. Just an expectation. A joke dressed up in condescension. It wasn't even the money. I could afford it, technically. But it was the implication, the way my life was once again being measured against what I lacked. I had no husband. No wedding registry. No glamorous honeymoon to distract from the fact that I was apparently just available. Financially and otherwise. And no one day not my mother, not Gary said a word to soften it. I wanted to reply something sharp, something that would make them pause. But I'd done that before. Once. When Maddie made a comment about how some people are just naturally more photogenic. I'd said, without raising my voice, it's not a crime to be ordinary, Maddie. And for weeks after, I was painted as the one who always has to make things negative. So I typed, Leah. Sure. And I put my phone face down. I sat there for a long time. In my apartment, surrounded by the very things I'd built, chosen, created. And for the first time in a while, I felt like a stranger in my own life. Not because anything catastrophic had happened, but because, again, I was reminded that, no matter what I accomplished, I'd always be seen as the one who didn't quite arrive. They weren't going to clap for me, not for paying, not for showing up, not for quietly taking it all in stride. They didn't see me. But they were going to. Eventually. Even if I had to buy the damn restaurant they were dining at just to shut it down in their faces. The thing about being the one who always takes care of things is that no one ever asks if you're okay doing it. They just assume you will, like it's written into your DNA, like your silence is a green light, like your refusal to cause a scene is proof that you must not mind. I spent most of that week answering client emails and triple-checking a fabric delivery that had gone missing. But in the quiet moments, those empty stretches of 11 p.m. silence, where the only sound in my apartment was the faint hum of the fridge, I kept coming back to that text. Not just the words themselves, but the way it felt to be expected, yet again, to carry something for a family that never seemed to notice the weight they kept handing me. I still went, of course. I dressed nicely, pulled my hair back in a low twist, wore the gold earrings my friend Charlotte had given me after my first magazine feature. I brought a birthday card for my mom and added a $100 gift certificate to a spa I knew she liked because I still wanted her to feel celebrated, even if part of me ached. It's strange how deeply we can crave approval from people who never learned how to give it, how some part of us never quite gives up hope that maybe this time will be different. Clover and Maple sat on the corner of King and Beaufane, the kind of restaurant that photographed well-clean lines, soft lighting, herb walls and brass fixtures, but in truth was overpriced and a little too eager to impress. The hostess smiled like she was trying out for a commercial. Maddie had clearly asked for the best table, and she got it. Long white oak, next to a window that looked out onto the sidewalk, where couples passed slowly in the amber dusk of early spring. They were already seated when I arrived, Mom in a bright coral dress, Gary in one of his endlessly repeated polo shirts, Maddie in something beige and sheer that probably cost more than my rent. Her husband, Ryan, was there too, of course, all cologne and watch face glint. Aunt Lydia, Mom's sister, had flown in from Charlotte, and Maddie's two bridesmaids turned permanent shadow, Janelle and Becca, were tittering in a corner with espresso martinis already half gone. I smiled, sat down, folded the napkin across my lap, pretended not to feel the hollow space beside me where no one had asked about my plus one. Maddie looked up from her phone just long enough to say, "You made it," in that bright, public voice that always sounded a touch too cheerful. "Leah's here, everyone." Like I was the last puzzle piece or the late arrival to a party that had already found its rhythm without me. Mom gave me the usual once-over-her gaze, starting at my shoes, traveling up, stopping somewhere around my neck as if checking for wrinkles or disappointments. She smiled, but her eyes were already back on Maddie before she said, "Glad you could make it, honey." I handed her the card and gift certificate. "Oh," she said, flipping the envelope between her fingers like she wasn't quite sure what it was. "That's thoughtful." And then she placed it on the table without opening it, already turning back to Maddie, who was recounting the wild bachelorette weekend she'd helped plan for a friend whose name I didn't even recognize. The dinner started as these things always do, with overlapping conversations, too loud laughter, and clinking glassware. The waiter came by with a polished smile, took drink orders, and glanced my way when he got to the end of the table. I ordered a sparkling water. "Just water?" Maddie asked, eyebrows raised. "You're not driving, are you?" I smiled politely and didn't answer. The appetizers came: flatbread with fig and prosciutto, mini crab cakes with aioli, a truffled something that no one really touched. I picked at the edge of a salad, more out of habit than hunger. The conversation turned to weddings, then houses, then baby names. Janelle was trying for a second. Maddie already had a list saved in her notes app. "You'll get there," Mom said to me, out of nowhere, as if reading a different conversation from a cue card no one else could see. Once you stop working so much, it's hard for men to feel needed when you're so independent. I froze, fork midair. "I didn't say anything about men," I replied, gently. She waved a hand, like I'd missed the point. "I'm just saying, don't wait too long. You don't want to be one of those women who wake up at 40 and regret it." My mouth tasted of iron. Aunt Lydia changed the subject with a story about a neighbor's garden, and I nodded along, but something inside me had cracked open like a window letting in a storm. I wanted to leave. I wanted to scream. I wanted anyone to say, that wasn't okay. But they didn't. Because this was the pattern. The unspoken rule. I absorbed, they delivered. When the main courses came steaks, sea bass, something vegan for Maddie's friend, I noticed the way Ryan passed Maddie his fork to taste his food before she offered a reaction. I noticed the way Mom took a bite of her filet, frowned, and said, "They should have let you design this place, Leah, the lighting's too cold." Like that was the only part of me that had value. And then, when the waiter brought the bill, he paused unsure of where to place it. Maddie motioned toward me without even looking up from her phone. "Leah's got it." No thank you. No glance. Not even a nod of acknowledgement. Just those 4 words, spoken as if they were obvious, as if I were the appointed sacrifice for the night's good mood. The bill was $746.18. I paid it. Quietly. Without drama, without protest. I paid it because I was done. Not done being generous. Not done being family. But done with being invisible. Done with being the fallback, the emotional mule, the one who doesn't ask for anything but is expected to give everything. I paid that bill like a final signature on a contract I never agreed to. After dinner, they posed for photos. I took them. Maddie uploaded them before we'd even left the restaurant. Her caption read, "Family is everything. Happy birthday, Mama." And there I was, just barely visible on the edge of the frame, cut off mid-shoulder. That night, I went home. I took off my earrings. I folded my dress back onto its hanger. And then, I opened my laptop and started looking into something I never thought I'd do. Buying the restaurant. Not to impress them. Not to prove anything. But because sometimes, the only way to break a cycle is to do something unthinkable. And if no one's going to make room for you at the table, you buy the damn table. And decide who gets to sit. I didn't cry that night, not at the restaurant, not on the drive home, not even when I unlocked the door to my apartment and stepped into the warm familiarity of the only space that didn't judge me for how quiet I'd become, but I felt it. A kind of tightening behind my ribs that wasn't sadness so much as the beginning of something else, something harder and colder and more dangerous, something I'd never really let myself feel in full, anger. It wasn't the kind of anger that explodes. No plates were broken. No doors slammed. I didn't rage into my pillow or call a friend to vent. No, this was the slow kind, the kind that seeps into your bones and sits there, quiet and coiled, because it's been fed drip by drip for years. It's the anger of every overlooked birthday, every congratulation that never came, every family photo where I was asked to move a little to the side, just a bit more, until I was cropped right out of my own life. The thing about being excluded is that it doesn't always happen through absence. It can happen when you're right there, in the room, at the table, holding a fork like everyone else, laughing at the jokes, refilling wine glasses, nodding at stories you've heard 3 times before, and still somehow, no one really sees you. They know you're there. They just don't see you. I've been feeling that since I was 12 years old, the year Mom married Gary, the year Maddie was born, the year everything shifted in ways I couldn't understand until much later. I went from being the only child of a single mother who worked herself raw to give me a stable life, to being the half-sibling in a blended family where I was treated like a distant relative who just happened to live down the hall. Gary never said he didn't like me, but he never really looked at me, either. He brought home gifts for Maddie and the girls when he traveled for work, but never remembered my birthday. He'd smile at my report cards like he was doing me a favor by caring. And Mom became softer with him but sharper with me, like she had to show him she could discipline the daughter she'd raised alone. When Maddie was a toddler, she used to crawl into my bed in the middle of the night with her blanket and her thumb in her mouth, and I'd hold her even when I had school in the morning. I made her pancakes. I brushed her hair. I was more of a third parent than a sibling, and for a while, I told myself that counted for something. But the older she got, the less she needed me, and the more she mirrored them: Gary's dismissive smirk, Mom's passive-aggressive comments wrapped in smiles. And I stayed the same. Responsible, dependable, background. In college, when I got into a competitive design program on scholarship, no one came to the portfolio showcase. Maddie had a cheer competition the same weekend. Mom sent a "so proud of you" text, and that was that. I remember sitting on the train ride home with my final project custom shelving built from salvaged wood balanced on my knees and wondering why the approval I craved always seemed like a prize I hadn't quite earned. Even now, after all the years I've poured into my work, after the late nights and the endless revisions, the client meetings and delayed payments and DIY website launches, Mom still introduces me to her friends as Leah. She does interiors, makes rooms look pretty. And then she turns the conversation to Maddie's latest TikTok partnership, as if that's the kind of career people should admire. There's a special kind of grief that comes with realizing your family doesn't actually know you, not the real you, the one who cries at renovation shows because someone rebuilt their childhood home, the one who finds comfort in antique furniture and the quiet hush of an empty room after it's been transformed. They don't see the hours I spend sketching floor plans or the nights I spend sourcing ethically made fabrics. They don't understand that my work is an extension of who I am. They never asked. And when I think about that dinner, when I replay the moment Maddie gestured toward me like I was just a line item on the invoice, when I remember how no one said thank you or even met my eyes, I realize it wasn't a one-off. It was the latest chapter in a story that's been quietly hurting me for most of my life. I don't know why that night broke me more than the others. Maybe it was the accumulation of it all. Maybe it was because I'd stopped hoping it would change and had instead started planning how to survive it. Maybe it was the realization that I'd become someone who paid to be ignored, who smiled while being dismissed, who showed up when no one would notice if I didn't. And maybe it was because deep down, I didn't want their love anymore. Not like this. I wanted respect. I wanted to be seen, not pitied or tolerated or used. That was the shift, the emotional tectonic plate that moved in the silence of my apartment that night, the part of me that had been waiting for them to choose me finally standing up and saying, "No more." I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew it had to be something that couldn't be overlooked. Something that would make them stop mid-sentence, put their forks down, and finally look up. Something they couldn't laugh off or chalk up to Leah being sensitive again. So I started with the thing I understood best. Space. I went online. I opened 6 tabs. I searched franchise ownership. I looked up commercial property listings. I researched Clover and Maple's corporate structure. I read until my eyes burned and my hands ached. I wasn't sure yet if it was possible, but I knew I was going to try. Because this time, I wasn't going to raise my voice. I was going to change the room. You'd think that after that dinner, after watching my mother's fingers brush right past the gift I spent time and thought picking out, after listening to my sister assign me the bill like I was just the family's designated ATM, after paying nearly $800 for people who didn't even bother to say thank you, I'd be smart enough to step back, to pull away from the whole lopsided mess of it all and save myself the trouble of being disappointed again. But the truth is, detaching from people who've hurt you isn't as simple as walking away. It's more like peeling skin from bones low, aching, and soaked in memory. Because they weren't always awful. Or maybe they were, and I just learned to find the warmth in scraps. The Sunday after the dinner, Mom called. Not to apologize, not to acknowledge anything that had happened. Just to ask if I could swing by and help her pick out new drapes for the den, because you've got that eye, sweetheart, and I trust your taste more than mine. I should have said no. I should have said I was busy, or tired, or just not in the mood, but I didn't. I said sure, like I always do, because part of me still wanted to believe that maybe being useful could one day turn into being loved. So I drove the 20 minutes to their house, parked in the same gravel driveway I used to ride my bike on as a kid, and stepped inside a home where everything looked familiar and yet so fundamentally unwelcoming that my stomach tightened the second the door closed behind me. The living room was still cluttered with Maddie's framed wedding portrait smiling, windswept shots of her in Tuscany with Ryan, her dress flowing like a dream, her eyes locked with his like no one else had ever existed. There were no photos of me. Not from college graduation. Not from the magazine spread that featured my design work. Just a single dusty frame on the sideboard from when I was about 9, smiling awkwardly with a missing front tooth, as if I'd stopped being worthy of display sometime around puberty. "Leah," Mom called from the kitchen. "Come in here, baby." She had fabric samples spread across the counter, beiges, creams, the occasional pale blue. She held one up. "Thought this might go nice with the couch. What do you think?" I gave her my honest opinion, too cool-toned, would clash with the warmth of the wood floors. She nodded thoughtfully, as if it had just occurred to her that I might know what I was talking about, even after a decade of doing it for a living. We spent half an hour looking at swatches, and for a brief moment, I let myself enjoy the task, the feel of linen under my fingers, the quiet intimacy of choosing details that make a house feel lived in. But then Gary came in, and the air shifted like someone had opened a window in winter. "Well, if it isn't the family financier," he said with a smirk, grabbing a beer from the fridge. "Still feeling generous, or should we all start tipping you now?" Mom chuckled, not in a mean way, but not in a way that defended me either, and I stood there, silent, because what was the point in arguing with someone who thought being cruel was just good humor? "I don't mind paying for dinner," I said softly, "but it would have been nice if someone said thank you." Gary raised an eyebrow. "You serious? You want a medal for doing a nice thing?" And Mom, instead of correcting him, looked at me with that tight smile she reserves for when I've embarrassed her. "Sweetheart, no one meant anything by it. Don't be so sensitive. We're family." I felt something cold slide through my chest, then not quite pain, not quite fury, but something in between. That word, family, thrown at me like it should be enough to explain away every cut, every slight, every moment I've been expected to swallow disrespect in the name of keeping the peace. Family, as they defined it, meant silence. It meant gratitude without reciprocity. It meant showing up with your hands full and your expectations empty. I helped pick out the drapes. I left without eating dinner. I told them I had a project deadline, which was a lie, but not really. I had a deadline for my soul, and it was long overdue. Later that week, Maddie called. Not to check in, not to apologize. She wanted to know if I could help her design a reading nook for her guest bedroom because your stuff is so clean looking, and Ryan wants it to feel upscale, you know. I asked if she had a budget. She said, "You don't charge me, do you?" I said I did now. She paused. "Wow, okay, well, I guess we'll just figure something else out then." Click. No fight. No raised voices. Just a quiet door closing where a bridge used to be. And then there was the family group chat. Gary. "Hey team, thinking Father's Day BBQ next month. Leah, you doing potato salad? Yours is always the best." Maddie. "Oh Mew. Yes, and the lemon bars too, please." Mom. "Leah honey, I'll need help with setup. Can you come early?" I stared at the screen, heart pounding, throat tight, wondering if they even remembered that I'd asked for nothing except to be acknowledged. Wondering if they understood that praise for my potato salad wasn't a substitute for respect. I didn't respond. I turned the phone off. I sat in my living room with the windows open, the warm Charleston air creeping in through the screens, and I realized that I'd become someone who needed to be needed because that was the only way I'd been allowed to exist in this family, as a provider, a helper, a background character in their main event. I'd never been the daughter whose name came up with pride. I'd never been the sibling who was praised at the dinner table. I'd been the one they called when something needed fixing, funding, or designing, and now I wasn't even angry anymore. I was done. And that feeling clean, precise, final was the sharpest clarity I'd ever known. So I reopened my laptop, clicked into my saved tabs, and began drafting an inquiry letter to the franchise owner of Clover and Maple. Because I may not have been invited to the table, but I was damn well going to own it. There's something oddly therapeutic about taking action when your entire body has been trained to retreat, like stretching muscles you didn't know were still alive. Like speaking your name out loud in a room where no one has ever asked who you are. I'd spent most of my life adapting, accommodating, softening the edges of my anger into something palatable, something that wouldn't upset the delicate balance of a family built on unspoken hierarchies. But now, for the first time in what felt like forever, I was moving with purpose, not permission. It started with research, not the casual kind, not the late night, half-hearted scrolling we do to feel better for 5 minutes, but real, targeted, intentional digging. I found the corporate ownership group behind Clover and Maple, a mid-size hospitality company based in Atlanta that had begun franchising the brand in upscale southern cities. And I read everything. Franchise requirements, owner investment levels, location history, and public sale rumors. And there, buried in a financial disclosure document filed 6 months ago, was what I'd been hoping for without realizing it. The Charleston location had been listed as under review for private sale due to operational strain and partner withdrawal. It wasn't just possible. It was timing. Perfect, uncanny, almost cinematic timing. But this wasn't a movie, and I wasn't a protagonist gifted with effortless plot twists. I was a woman with a moderate savings account, decent credit, and a stubborn streak honed by years of being ignored. I knew I couldn't buy it alone. But I also knew I wasn't alone, not entirely. I had contacts, clients, friends I'd met through years of honest work and relentless professionalism. People who'd seen me, really seen me, in ways my own family never had. I reached out to Sam, a commercial real estate agent who'd hired me 2 years ago to redesign a boutique hotel lobby. We'd gotten along well, and I remembered him saying once, over coffee, that I had an investor's eye if I ever wanted to think bigger. So I called. "Leah Crawford," he said, warm and curious, after the second ring. "What a surprise! To what do I owe this call?" I took a breath. "I want to buy a restaurant. And I need your help." And there was a beat of silence, then, a low laugh, not mocking, but impressed. Now this I did not see coming. "Tell me everything." So I did. I told him about Clover and Maple, about the sale listing, about the franchise group, and my research. I didn't tell him about the dinner, or my family, or the humiliation of footing the bill with a smile while they talked over me like I was part of the wallpaper. I kept that part buried, not out of shame, but because this step wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about creating something I could stand inside and say, "I built this. I chose this. No one gave it to me, and no one can take it away." Sam listened, asked smart questions, promised to run numbers and get back to me. And when he did 4 days later, it was with a tone I hadn't heard directed at me in a long time. Genuine respect. "There's a real opportunity here," he said. "But it'll take a few things: your capital, my partner's backing, and a strong brand pitch to the franchise board. You up for that?" "Yes," I said, without hesitation. I've never been more up for anything in my life. And that was the start of it. In between client meetings and fabric orders and site visits, I carved out hours, early mornings and midnight stretches to work on my proposal. I wrote it like a manifesto, a vision for what Clover and Maple could become under my leadership. A restaurant that didn't just serve overpriced steak and artichoke dip, but one that felt like memory and atmosphere and conversation, where design met warmth and people stayed not just for the food, but for how the space made them feel. I redesigned the interior on paper, subtle shifts in color palette, updated lighting, softer acoustics, intimate nooks instead of long, impersonal tables. I added warm walnut tables, hand-thrown pottery for plating, linen napkins with a tactile story. I imagined community events, collaborations with local artists, Sunday brunches with live acoustic sets. It wasn't just a restaurant, it was a living extension of who I was, a kind of architectural defiance against every room I'd ever stood in without being seen. Sam was impressed. His partner, David, was cautious but intrigued. And the franchise board? They scheduled a Zoom call. I prepped for it like I'd never prepped for anything. I rehearsed every answer, printed out every document, wore a tailored blazer and a quiet smile. I was nervous, of course I was, but underneath the nerves was something steadier, a confidence born not from entitlement, but from survival. I didn't need them to validate me. I needed them to believe in the numbers, in the plan, in the woman they saw across the screen. And they did. 2 weeks later, I received the letter of intent. It felt unreal, opening that email in my apartment, sitting barefoot on the floor beside a half-unpacked client sample box. I read it 3 times before I let myself believe it. Pending final inspection and financial closure, Leah Crawford will become the new operating owner of Clover and Maple, Charleston. I exhaled so hard, I startled myself. And then I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the release was too big for anything else. I was doing it. I was really doing it. And I hadn't told anyone. Not yet. Because I knew how they'd react. Mom would find some way to dismiss it as impulsive. Maddie would make it about her Rask if I could get her a content shoot reservation before the place reopened. Gary would probably joke about how I was finally becoming a grown-up. But this wasn't for them. For once, it wasn't for anyone but me. And that alone was enough to keep going. It didn't take long for the news to reach them, not because I told them directly, but because Charleston isn't a big town when it comes to the circles that matter. And it turns out that when a decorator suddenly becomes the new owner of a high-end restaurant in one of the most visible corners of King Street, people notice. Clients started texting me, "Congratulations." Former classmates I hadn't spoken to in years liked my announcement on LinkedIn. Even a few old teachers reached out to say how proud they were. But from my own family? Silence, like a thick, expectant fog. Until the storm hit. It came 3 days after the franchise board finalized the deal, in the form of a phone call I almost didn't answer because the contact simply said, "Mom." I let it ring until the last second. "Hi, Mom," I said, already bracing. Her voice was tight, sharp in the way it got when she was trying not to sound upset but couldn't quite pull it off. "So, I hear you bought a restaurant." I swallowed. "I did." "A restaurant, Leah. Really?" I let the silence stretch, gave her space to finish the sentence she wasn't saying. "You didn't think to tell your family?" she added, as if my lack of announcement was a personal betrayal rather than a boundary she'd taught me to keep through years of indifference. "I didn't think anyone would be interested," I said, carefully, because I wasn't in the mood to pretend anymore. "Well," she said after a pause. "People are talking. Lydia called me, said she saw something online, and Maddie's upset. She said you told Charlotte before you told your own sister?" "I didn't tell Charlotte," I said. "She saw it on LinkedIn." "So it's true?" "Yes, Mom. It's true. I'm the new owner of Clover and Maple." She made us sound half disapproval, half disbelief. "That's a lot of responsibility." "I'm aware. And money. I've done the math." A longer silence now. The kind that comes not from shock but recalibration, like she was trying to reorient herself around this version of me she hadn't accounted for. A version that didn't need her approval. A version that didn't ask, "Well, I just hope you haven't bitten off more than you can chew." "I haven't," I said. "But thank you for your concern." And then, softer, a final jab wrapped in false warmth. "Just don't forget who's been there for you, Leah." I ended the call without responding. Because the truth was, no one had been there. Not really. Not in the way that mattered. Not in the late nights or the doubts or the loan rejections or the self-doubt spirals. They hadn't seen me cry over client losses or celebrate when I finally broke even for the first time. They hadn't been there when I stayed up until 3 a.m. designing mock-ups for free just to get my foot in the door. They hadn't been there because they'd never looked past their own expectations long enough to ask what I was building. And now that I'd built something real, something solid and mine, they were uncomfortable. Not because I'd failed, but because I hadn't. Because I'd done something without them. Without their input. Without their blessing. 2 days later, Maddie invited me to coffee just to chat. I knew better. But I went anyway. We met at a sleek little cafe near her side of town, all polished brass and oat milk lattes, and she showed up in oversized sunglasses and a jacket I'd seen featured in Vogue's spring edit. She hugged me like we were still pretending we were close, then pulled back with a fixed smile. "So," she said, crossing her legs, "a whole restaurant. That's big." "It is. You could have told me." "You never asked." She blinked at that, thrown for a second. Still, it would have been nice to be looped in. I mean, I'm your sister. I stirred my tea slowly. Were you looped in when I paid for dinner? Her mouth flattened. Leah. No, I said quietly, but with steel. You don't get to pull the sister card when it only applies in your favor. I've spent years being the one who shows up. Who pays, who listens, who supports. And you? You've made it clear what I am to you, a convenience. She sat back, eyes wide. Okay, wow. Where is this coming from? This has been coming for a long time, Maddie. I just finally stopped apologizing for being angry. For a moment, she looked genuinely stunned. And then, the wall came down. The practiced laugh. The dismissive shrug. So what? You're mad at us because you've been too nice all these years? That's not our fault, Leah. No, I said. It's mine, but it stops now. We sat in brittle silence. And then she said, too casually, I heard you're doing something with the schedule at the restaurant. I didn't flinch. She leaned in. Someone said you're changing the hours. That true? Yes. She arched a brow. Even on weekends? Especially on weekends. A long pause. Then, you know we made a standing reservation for Mom's birthday again. I know. And? I'll be closing at 6. Her face didn't change, but her eyes did sharp, calculating. Why? I didn't smile. Because I can. And for the first time in our lives, Maddie didn't have a comeback. I stood. Took the last sip of tea. Walked out into the sun. Because I wasn't interested in being liked anymore. I was interested in being free. You always imagine rock bottom as something loud, a dramatic collapse, a screaming match, fists on tables, doors slamming, but the truth is, it's often silent, slow, and disguised as another ordinary Tuesday, when the world keeps spinning but something inside you quietly folds inward, like a part of you has gone missing and you didn't even notice until the silence grows so loud it hums in your bones. For me, it was the night after the soft launch of the restaurant, the private tasting for a few local business owners, a couple of Charleston food writers, 2 clients I trusted, and Sam with his business partner David, who had brought his wife and kept squeezing my shoulder like I'd just crossed some invisible finish line. The compliments were real, the smiles genuine, and when people clinked glasses and said things like, "This place feels different, like it has a soul," I felt something warm and bittersweet bloom in my chest, a strange mixture of pride and grief, because the one thing I wanted just once was for someone from my own family to be in that room, to look at me and say, "I see you now." But no one was there. Not Mom, not Maddie, not Gary. And I hadn't expected them, not really, but I guess some part of me still hoped that if the accomplishment was big enough, undeniable enough, they'd show up, not for free drinks or fancy sliders, but because they finally understood what I was trying to build. Instead, when I got home exhausted, wearing heels that made my arches scream, my makeup rubbed off under my eyes from a long day of nerves, I checked my phone and saw only one message on the family thread. Gary, don't forget your lemon bars for Sunday. Mom says she's expecting them. That was it. No mention of the restaurant. No congrats. No, how did it go? Just another reminder that, to them, I was still the help. Still, the reliable side character who brings dessert and disappears before anyone notices she never sat down. I stood in the kitchen holding my phone, my hands shaking not from anger, but from something deeper and heavier, something I didn't want to name, because if I did, it would pour out of me and I wasn't sure I'd be able to stop it. I placed the phone face down on the counter. Walked to the living room. Saturday on the couch in my cocktail dress, staring at the bookshelf I'd built myself, the candles I'd chosen carefully, the soft lighting that made the room feel safe, and suddenly, none of it felt like enough. Not the restaurant. Not the applause. Not the compliments. Because it hadn't filled the gap I'd spent years pretending didn't hurt anymore. I buried my face in my hands and cried long, body-shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep, old, untouched by logic or success, The kind of crying that feels like unlearning every time you smiled through pain, every time you swallowed pride to keep peace, every time you accepted less and told yourself it was still love. I cried for the birthday parties where Maddie got centerpieces and helium balloons and I got boxed cake and a "don't make a fuss." I cried for the time Mom forgot to pick me up from a middle school play and I waited an hour in costume until a janitor offered me a ride home. I cried for the college acceptance letter I opened alone because no one was home, for the meals I cooked, the beds I made, the times I showed up when no one asked, the gratitude I gave that never echoed back. And most of all, I cried for the part of me that still wanted them to care. I didn't know how long I sat there, but when I finally moved, it was only to change out of the dress, slip into sweatpants, and crawl into bed fully aware that sleep wouldn't come easily. I stared at the ceiling and thought about how you can be surrounded by people your whole life and still feel like a ghost in your own story. I thought about all the holidays where I played photographer, decorator, planner but was never in the photos. About the dinners where my name was mentioned only when someone needed something passed. About how every success of mine was greeted with lukewarm "that's nice," while Maddie's every minor achievement was met with applause and hashtags. And I realized maybe the worst part isn't the pain itself, but the loneliness of carrying it alone, year after year, pretending it doesn't change you when it absolutely does. I felt small, powerless, hollowed out from the inside. Because even after everything I'd done, the years of work, the risk, the financial juggling, the discipline, it still hadn't been enough to earn their pride. And if that wasn't enough, what would ever be? The next morning, I couldn't look at my reflection. I skipped breakfast, answered emails on autopilot, ignored messages from Sam asking if I'd seen the article a local food critic had already posted online, praising the ambiance and unusually thoughtful design. I saw it. I just couldn't feel it. Because nothing robs you of joy faster than waiting for applause that never comes. That night, I stood in front of the mirror and said out loud quietly, shakily, but with intent, "You don't need their love to be worthy, you never did." It felt unconvincing. But maybe healing isn't one big declaration. Maybe it's 1,000 small ones, repeated over and over until they start to stick. Maybe this was one. And maybe, just maybe, it was enough to take me to the next day. It's strange how life has a way of revealing the truth not with fireworks or confrontations, but with something quiet: a sentence overheard, a document found, a casual remark that makes the ground shift under your feet before you even realize what it means. And once you see it, you can't unsee it, you can't unknow it, and you definitely can't go back to pretending that the people you've spent your entire life trying to please weren't capable of hurting you in ways you never imagined. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon, in the middle of a normal workday, just when I'd finally begun to feel something close to balance again after that long, aching night of tears, after the numb silence that followed, after the tiny declarations I whispered into the mirror each morning just to hold myself together. I was at my desk, sketching out revised plans for the restaurant's entryway, trying to solve a bottleneck issue with flow and lighting, when my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen in years: Harriet Collins, an old family friend, someone who used to live 3 doors down from us when I was a kid. She was my mom's closest friend for a while, the kind of neighbor who brought over lasagna when someone was sick and always had a cold Diet Coke in her fridge just for me. Because I once mentioned I liked it more than regular. I hadn't heard from her since I was maybe 25, when she moved to Florida after her husband died. But there she was, calling out of the blue, and something about it made me answer without hesitation. "Leah, darling," she said, her voice warm, worn by time but unmistakably hers. "I just read the piece about you in Low Country Living. Beautiful, just beautiful. I knew you'd make something of yourself." I felt a strange, sudden lump in my throat. "Thank you, Harriet. That means a lot." She paused, then her voice dropped into something softer, more tentative. "I hope this isn't out of place, but I wanted to say something. I've held on to it a long time, and maybe it's not mine to tell, but I always thought it wasn't fair, what happened with your grandmother's inheritance." I froze. "What?" She hesitated again, then said it carefully, like someone setting down a fragile vase. Your mother told me years ago that your dad's mom left you something in her will. Something she didn't want touched by anyone else. But Gary convinced her it would be simpler if it all went into a family trust, managed by him. She said it was better that way, that it would be more useful to the household as a whole. I couldn't breathe. Harriet. I never knew about any of that. There was silence on her end. And then, softly, I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I just assumed. I thought maybe you knew. But I didn't. I didn't know. No one had ever told me that my grandmother, the only grandparent who ever made me feel like I was enough, exactly as I was shad, tried to leave me something just for me, and that it had been taken, absorbed, erased like it had never existed. And suddenly, so many things made sense. The strange way Gary always insisted on doing the taxes himself. The time Mom mentioned, offhandedly, that managing a family means sharing everything, when I asked why Maddie got a new car for graduation and I didn't. The missing Christmas checks that Grandma used to send just for Leah, which stopped arriving a year after she died. I'd thought they'd forgotten, or that it was a clerical error, and I didn't ask because I'd been trained not to question gifts that never came. But now, it all had shape. They had stolen from me. Not just love, not just attention, but actual money. An inheritance that might have helped me start my business years earlier, might have taken the weight off during those months I skipped meals just to cover rent and client expenses. They took what was mine, and they never told me, and the worst part wasn't the money. It was the betrayal, the ease with which they had rewritten the truth and let me believe I'd simply been forgotten. I hung up the phone in a daze, opened my laptop, and for the first time in my life, I searched for a lawyer. I found someone reputable, a local woman named Camille Foster, known for family estate cases and a no-nonsense reputation. I called her that afternoon, explained what I knew in quiet, measured words, and she listened with that particular kind of stillness you only hear on the other end of the line when someone is already calculating the damage. She asked for names, documents, timelines. She asked if I had access to anything: wills, trusts, letters. I didn't. Not yet. But I promised her I'd try. And in the quiet hours that followed, I did something I never thought I'd do. I texted Maddie. Me. Hey. I need something. Grandma's will, do you have a copy? Or know where I could get one? She read it immediately, but didn't reply for 15 minutes. Then, Maddie. Why are you asking about that now? Me. Because I should have been told the truth. Maddie. Talk to Mom. I'm not getting involved. Me. You already are. No reply. But I didn't need one. Because now, I knew. And now that I knew, there was no turning back. They thought I would stay quiet forever. That I would never question, never dig. That I would keep baking lemon bars and footing dinner bills and nodding along while they split what was never theirs to begin with. But they underestimated me. They always had. And that was about to change. I didn't plan the confrontation. I didn't rehearse speeches or plot timing. It wasn't some perfectly staged moment with the right lighting and trembling strings in the background. It happened the way real things do, messily, unexpectedly, and all at once, in a kitchen that still smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, on a Sunday afternoon that should have been simple, except it wasn't, and never would be again. They'd invited me, as usual, like nothing had changed, like I hadn't gone quiet for weeks, like I hadn't opened a legal inquiry into my own bloodline. Maddie had texted, Mom says bring the bars. You coming early? With a sun emoji, and I stared at the message, stunned by the casual brightness of it, as if the last 32 years could be brushed aside with a cheery punctuation mark. I baked the lemon bars. Not because they deserved them, but because I needed my hands to do something. The act of pressing the shortbread crust into the pan, of whisking lemon and sugar and egg into something golden and sharp, it grounded me. Gave me a task to carry my rage. I arrived at their house at 2 o'clock, just like they asked. Mom greeted me at the door in her usual half-apron, cheeks flushed from the oven heat, and she smiled like she hadn't stolen from me. There she is, my little chef, she said, reaching for the glass dish I carried. I didn't smile. Inside, Gary was sipping beer from a frosted glass, the television humming behind him with a muted golf tournament. Maddie was arranging crudités on a slate board, dressed in white like she was attending a garden brunch, not standing in the middle of the lie they all helped maintain. Smells amazing in here, Maddie chirped. You look good, Leah. That jacket's new? I looked at her. Really looked at her. And I saw it not innocence, not confusion, but that flicker of calculation, the way her eyes darted toward Mom for a cue, the way she kept her tone sweet, controlled, as if keeping the performance going would somehow keep the truth from exploding. I need to talk to all of you, I said, calmly, evenly, like I wasn't already shaking inside. Mom blinked. Okay, what's going on? I set the lemon bars on the counter, removed the foil, stared at the pale yellow surface like it might give me the strength I needed to get through what I was about to say. I spoke to Harriet Collins. A beat. She told me about Grandma's will. Stillness. Maddie froze with a celery stick halfway to her mouth. Gary didn't move. I turned to Mom. You knew she left something for me. You knew, and you let Gary convince you to fold it into a family trust. Mom opened her mouth, then closed it. You took it, I said, louder now, firmer. You stole from me. Gary scoffed. Now hang on, stole. That's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation, it's a fact. I spoke to a lawyer. There's record of a trust being created 3 months after Grandma's death. There's no line item under my name. But there should have been. She left me something. You buried it. Mom's voice wavered, soft and trembling, but not with remorse, with defense. Leah, we didn't bury anything. It was complicated. Your grandmother. She wasn't well near the end, she didn't understand. Don't, I said, ice running through my spine. Don't twist this into some story where I'm supposed to feel bad for asking questions. Gary stood now, puffing his chest like he always did when challenged. You want to play victim? Go ahead. But that money went to the house, to groceries, to schooling. We didn't hoard it. To Maddie's car. To your pool upgrade. To vacations I wasn't invited to. Oh. Maddie set down the celery stick. Okay, this is getting insane. Is it? I turned to her. You never wondered where the money came from for your Europe trip? For the down payment Mom helped you with? You never thought to ask how the family that once split grocery bills with coupons suddenly had enough for beach rentals and designer furniture? She said nothing. You always knew, I said. You may not have looked at the documents, but you knew, you benefited. And none of you ever told me. Ugh. Mom sat down at the kitchen table, her hands trembling now. We did what we thought was best. No, I said, you did what was easiest. For you. You took something meant for me and told yourselves it was okay because I was quiet, because I never fought back. Because I made the lemon bars and smiled and kept paying for dinners no one thanked me for. Gary snorted. Oh, so this is about the dinner again? No, I said, cold now. That was just the moment I finally stopped pretending I wasn't drowning. The silence stretched thick and unbearable. I want the documents, I said, turning back to Mom. The original will. The trust paperwork. All of it. Camilla attorney will be contacting you. Her face paled at the name. You're bringing in lawyers now? She whispered. I am, I said. Because you've made it clear that this family only respects things when they come with consequences. Maddie stood, arms crossed. I can't believe you're doing this. You're tearing the family apart. No, I said, voice steady. I'm just refusing to be the glue anymore. And with that, I walked out. The lemon bars stayed on the counter. Because they were never for them. Not anymore. They didn't respond right away. Not to the confrontation, not to the name of my lawyer, not even to the letters Camille's office sent within the week, certified mail, formal, typed on heavy paper with language that left no room for interpretation. The silence stretched out like a challenge, like they were waiting for me to blink first, to back down, to apologize for the audacity of asking for what was mine. But I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I didn't soften my tone in follow-ups or send messages just to check in. I let the silence hang there until it began to rot in their own hands. And then, eventually, the pushback domino from Maddie, who ghosted entirely, or from Gary, who I imagine was too busy covering his tracks, but from my mother, who called me one morning with a voice full of weariness and a little fear. "I got the letter," she said. "No greeting, no preamble. It's all very official." "Yes," I said. "It is." There was a pause. "I didn't know you were so angry." 1. "I didn't know you were so comfortable pretending I didn't matter." That stopped her. "I just thought, you didn't need it. You always seemed so capable." That word capable landed like a bruise pressed too hard. It had been the story of my life, hadn't it? I was capable, so I didn't get help. I was independent, so I didn't get affection. I was strong, so I was left to carry what should have crushed anyone else. I didn't respond. She tried again. "Do we really have to go through the courts? Couldn't we just talk?" I closed my eyes, took a long breath. If talking worked, we wouldn't be here. There was nothing left to say after that. We ended the call. And just like that, the shift was complete. Because the moment I refused to shrink again, the power dynamic cracked. The foundation that had held up their world, me, the agreeable daughter, the silent sister, the dependable shadow, had eroded. And they didn't know what to do with the version of me that no longer asked to be accepted. Camille kept me updated. She was calm, direct, and brilliant. Within a month, she'd secured access to financial records, exposed the trust details, and confirmed what Harriet had hinted at, that my grandmother had left me $48,000 in a private bequest, intended for me to use as I wished, and it had been absorbed into a family trust that Gary managed and drained over 5 years without so much as a signature from me. That money was gone, now spent on home upgrades, vacations, college tuition for Maddie, business expenses that never returned profit, but that didn't mean justice couldn't be pursued. Camille laid out the options. We could sue for breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, emotional distress. It would take time, yes. And no, it wouldn't erase the past. But it would force accountability. It would name what had been hidden. And for me, that was enough. I said yes. And the moment I did, I felt something unlock inside me, like the door I'd been pressing against for 30 years finally gave way. I didn't need to win in court to win in life I already had. Because the version of me that stood now, rooted and unafraid, was someone they could no longer ignore. I poured that same fire into the restaurant. I redesigned the interior not to impress critics, but to express who I was: quiet elegance, bold warmth, an invitation to be seen and heard. I hung portraits of local women entrepreneurs on the wall behind the bar. I replaced the long, impersonal tables with intimate booths that encouraged real conversation. I changed the menu to reflect comfort and confidence: truffle mac and cheese with a kick of chili, lemon rosemary chicken that reminded me of Sunday dinners I used to dream of. And I made one final change. I closed the restaurant at 6 p.m. sharp on the evening of my mother's birthday. They had a reservation. Maddie had made it, just like she did every year. She hadn't even bothered to confirm with me directly. She'd booked it online, sent the details in the group chat I hadn't replied to in weeks. I didn't cancel it. I just locked the doors at 6. Lit candles on every empty table. Played Nina Simone over the speakers. And watched from across the street as they arrived at 6:15, Mom in a powder blue dress, Gary in khakis, Maddie in something white and flowy and smug. I saw the moment they reached the door, the confusion on their faces, the silent conversation that passed between them when they saw the sign. Closed for private event. I didn't answer their calls. I didn't reply to their texts. I sat on a bench nearby, drinking my own damn champagne, and let the silence speak louder than anything I could have said. Because sometimes justice isn't loud, it's precise. It's a lock that clicks into place. It's a door that doesn't open, no matter how hard they knock. It's finally sitting at a table you built with your own hands and choosing who gets to join you. There's a quiet that settles in your bones after a long war, something still and deep, not the absence of noise, but the absence of weight, of waiting, of walking around braced for disappointment like it's an old coat you've forgotten how to take off. That's what it felt like in the weeks after I closed the doors on my family's birthday dinner, not with spite, but with a finality that had been building in me for decades, the kind of decision that doesn't just mark a boundary, but becomes a new foundation, one I could finally build a life on without fear of it being ripped out from under me. The lawsuit didn't go away. Camille kept pushing forward with her slow, steady precision, requesting documents, collecting evidence, scheduling depositions. I didn't need updates every day. I didn't chase outcomes. For once, I let someone else handle the storm while I focused on what I had almost forgotten to fight for myself. The restaurant settled into a rhythm, one that fit me like a second skin. We opened on time, closed when I said we would, and the space filled more and more each night with people who didn't just come for the food, but for the feeling. I saw old clients, new couples, solo diners with books in their laps and wine in their glasses. I watched strangers laugh under the lights I had chosen, watched them share bread and soft stories in the booths I had designed, and I thought, this is what it means to create something that lasts not for their approval, but for your own belonging. I no longer needed my family to validate me. And slowly, the ache of not having them there began to dull, not because it didn't hurt anymore, but because the space where they used to sit inside me wasn't empty now. It was just quiet. Room I had reclaimed. Air I could finally breathe. Charlotte came by often. She sat at the bar after her shift at the gallery, drinking ginger beer and teasing me about my restaurant owner walk, which apparently had more confidence than the version of me she used to meet for coffee, crying over texts from Maddie or strained conversations with my mother. "You don't even flinch when you say no now," she said once, smiling over the rim of her glass. "That's how I know you're free." I smiled, too. Because I was. Not untouchable. Not invincible. Just free. Sometimes that's enough. Mom didn't reach out again. Neither did Gary. Maddie posted vague quotes on her Instagram about family loyalty and sisters who betray you. And I let them slide past me like wind. I didn't need to respond. The truth had already been spoken. And once it's spoken, you never need to shout. One night, after closing, I sat alone at table 7, the one by the window, where the light slants just right at sunset, and I opened a letter Camille had mailed instead of emailing. Because she said some things deserved paper. Inside was a single paragraph. The settlement had been reached. The court acknowledged the mishandling of funds. Gary had signed an agreement to repay a portion over time, and more importantly, the family trust had been legally dissolved. The estate was officially corrected. My name was in it. My grandmother's bequest acknowledged, documented, and finally, indisputably mine. I didn't cry. I just sat there and let the weight of that truth settle into my chest, not as pain, but as affirmation. I had been right. I had always been right. They just never wanted me to know it. And now I did. I closed the letter, slid it into my bag, and stared out at the city, my city now, in a way it never had been before. Not because it changed, but because I did. I saw myself in its streets, in the quiet resilience of its buildings, in the way the air holds both heat and hope. That weekend, Charlotte threw me a dinner, not a birthday, not a holiday, just a dinner for the simple fact that I existed and mattered. She invited people who had supported me, believed in me, laughed with me in the hard seasons, and celebrated me in the quiet ones. It wasn't loud or fancy, just a long wooden table, a few candles, shared wine, music playing from someone's playlist, mismatched chairs, and arms brushing as dishes were passed. And for the first time in years, I felt completely whole. No part of me was performing. No part of me was shrinking. No part of me was waiting for someone to ask me to make lemon bars. I was just here. Seen. Heard. Loved. I don't know if my mother still tells herself that what they did was justified. I don't know if Maddie ever rereads our last texts and wonders if she should have said something different. I don't know what they tell themselves to sleep at night, or if they sleep at all. And honestly, I don't care. Because healing isn't about whether they regret it. It's about whether you can forgive yourself for letting it hurt you for so long. And I can. Finally. I can. I used to believe that family was something fixed, like a birthmark or a last name that it defined you. That it shaped your worth. That it was the immovable center of who you were. I thought that if I just kept showing up, if I just made myself useful enough, kind enough, quiet enough, they'd see me, they'd reach out, they'd pull me in, and the cold would finally melt. I thought love was something you earned. I thought loyalty meant staying, even when staying shattered you. But now? Now I understand that family is not who shares your blood. It's who sees you clearly and still stays. It's who remembers the things that matter. Who says your name with respect, not with expectation. It's not a birthright. It's a choice every single day, a choice. And when people choose to hurt you, when they choose silence instead of protection, when they choose themselves over the truth, again and again and again, then you have a choice too. You can keep shrinking, or you can walk away. I walked away. Not all at once. Not with slamming doors or final words. But slowly, step by painful step, I let go of the story I had told myself for so long, the story where I had to keep earning a place at their table, keep smiling through crumbs, keep apologizing for taking up space. I let go of the hope that one more act of service, one more sacrifice, one more generous gesture would finally be the thing that changed their hearts. Because here's the hardest truth I've had to learn. Some people will never see you. Not because you're not worthy, but because their vision is built around who they need you to be, and the moment you become something else, something stronger, something self-owned, you become uncomfortable, inconvenient, even dangerous. And that's not your fault. I spent years blaming myself for the way they made me feel. I thought if I felt invisible, it was because I wasn't bright enough. If I felt used, it was because I didn't have boundaries. If I felt hurt, it was because I was too sensitive. But no. The truth is, I was generous. The truth is, I gave them more love than they ever earned. The truth is, they took and took and took and called it normal. And when I finally stopped giving, they called it betrayal. But it wasn't betrayal. It was survival. It was self-respect. It was the first real act of love I had ever given to myself. I won't pretend it was easy. There were days I doubted everything. Days I wanted to call, to explain, to try again. Days I saw a family laughing over brunch and felt something hollow in my chest. Because grief doesn't always come from loss. Sometimes it comes from choosing yourself and realizing how much you had to give up to do it. But I kept going. I built something with my hands and my heart and my name on the lease. I designed rooms where strangers felt safe. I gave other people the warmth I had been denied. And in doing that, I found my own. Not all at once, but piece by piece. And now, I don't just own a restaurant. I own my story. I own my silence and my voice and the way I no longer flinch when people ask about my family. Sometimes I just say, we're not close. And that's enough. Sometimes I say, I grew up in a house where love had rules I could never quite follow. And sometimes I say nothing because not every wound deserves an audience. But when I look in the mirror now, I see someone who kept going. I see someone who stopped waiting. Someone who stopped baking lemon bars for people who couldn't bother to remember her favorite flower. Someone who showed up for herself when no one else did. And I am proud of her. I am proud of the girl who cried into her pillow at 14 because no one came to her art show. Proud of the young woman who walked into a job interview with thrifted heels and a resume built on hope. Proud of the woman who bought a restaurant not for revenge, but for reclamation. Proud of the woman who said, enough, and meant it. So if you're reading this, or listening to this, and you feel like the background character in your own family, if you've ever paid the bill, done the work, smiled through the ache, and walked away with nothing but the weight of what you didn't say, I want you to hear me when I tell you this. You are not small because they can't see you. You are not unworthy because they made you feel replaceable. You are not broken because they never learned how to love you the way you deserved. You are whole. You are powerful. And you do not need their table. You can build your own. Set it exactly how you like it. Decide who gets to sit. And close the door softly, firmly on anyone who ever made you beg to be fed. Because the truth is, I didn't win because they finally saw me. I won because I finally saw myself. And once you do that, once you really see yourself, you never settle for crumbs again. Not in love. Not in family. Not in life.